Oh man, that's it. And we're live.
Yeah.
Yeah. um I'm curious. I'm curious to play. I didn't read any of the index card RPG stuff. So when is it like when you go into a room, everything in the room is that?
Yeah, literally everything is whatever the target number is. So if you encounter a goblin or, a gigantic boss, whatever the DM has set as the target number for that room is checked against this number. It makes it pretty simple, which is cool, which I thought was really cool. You're not testing against, you don't have to add a bunch of different things or take all these, armor classes into account. It's just you roll. Did you roll a 12 with, whatever you have? And if you did, then you hit or you succeed. If not. What's up, Ryan?
Quinn's here already. Just getting prepared.
He's here.
I didn't know if you'd get stuck unloading MAA, Quinn, and you're going to have to cancel on us. I was afraid of that. But glad to see that you've joined.
Session 0 of Session 0.
It should have been episode 0. Session
I know.
0.
Damn it.
Session 0.
Session 0. Session 0.
000. Maybe that would have been too on the nose.
I think it would have been just on the nose enough. Man, I haven't streamed in so long. It feels so weird.
Ooh, Hogwarts Legacy. Is that any good? I keep hearing that it is good. I need to know.
I know nothing. I know nothing about it. I have 3 drinks and snacks all prepared.
I only have
for
2.
This hour and a half of.
See, it's fantastic. Dang it! All right, is it on Steam or what do you get it on? Now is not the time. You came in completely blind. Oh man, everything I saw, I couldn't escape the news that everybody thought it was gonna suck because it's from a no-name developer, and I guess it's like amazing.
Hogwarts Legacy.
Yeah. Yeah, you haven't streamed in forever, Ryan.
No, man, it's been since like June of last year, I think, or July. I kind of like burned myself out. And after a while, streaming to like 10 people 3 days a week was cutting into my sex time. And I need that sex time.
Yeah, that's unacceptable.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I saw Hades 2 is going to come out this year. So
no way.
Time to get back on the wagon.
I got to still beat Hades 1.
Did you ever beat Hades?
No, I made it to Hades a few times,
right,
and lost. Yeah, I never beat him.
Man,
but fuck it, I didn't care.
All right, you know what? Let's get the show on the road.
Let's do it, man.
So, anybody who's here live, I do a little intro that's just for the podcast audio, so don't get too worked up. Hello, adventurers, and welcome to Session 0, episode number 1. This is an RPG podcast tailored for beginner DMs by 2 novice dungeon masters. Come with us on our journey to learn the art and mastery of trying to run an RPG. I'm Ben, and my co-host tonight is my good friend Ryan. Why don't you introduce yourself, Ryan?
Hey, what's up, everybody? I am Ryan. That's me. I mean, you might know me from the Gamecasters podcast, but it's all board games at this point. If you're here for RPGs, you'll have any clue who I am. But yeah, I'm super pumped about this, dude.
Oh, me too. This has been in the back of my mind for months. And I'm glad we finally were just like, you know what, let's do it. Let's actually do it. Because the thing is I just keep finding myself wanting to talk about running a role-playing game. And it's hard to find the outlet for that. Now, the problem that I have, and I bring this up all the time, is that the only people in my day-to-day life that I can talk to about this kind of stuff are the players in the campaign I've started running.
Right.
And I can't talk to them about this kind of stuff all the time.
Right.
What I'm always worried about a couple of things. First of all, I don't know if they want to hear it. Second of all, I don't want to spoil the experience. And
True.
like, it's different in like spoil the story is one thing, but I don't want to spoil the experience as in let's sit down and talk about the machine behind the curtain.
Yeah,
right.
You don't want to break the fourth wall to the people that you're trying to keep it illusory for. Yeah, I completely get that. Well, plus, you're not really going to, I mean, maybe with people like Ryan and Seth, you said, who have DM'd before, but you're not going to probably get what you want out of talking to the player characters about your DM experience because they don't share that. They're not doing that with you. Luckily for you and me, we're kind of both doing it at the same time. We both kind of started DMing for the first time at the same time.
That's right.
So it kind of works out perfectly.
It does. So what we've decided to do, we threw the show together. We're going to do it once a month, and we're going to live stream it. So if you're listening to the audio of this, you can catch us live on Twitch and YouTube. We dual stream to both. We're trying to shoot for like the second week of the month. Doing Wednesday right now. We're going to stick to that. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe, probably. Ryan and I are going to throw a discussion topic at each other each month, and then we're going to try to pull on a special guest. So tonight's special guest, we're going to pull him in a little bit later, is my good friend Ryan Quinn, who was my first Dungeon Master and is now a player in my game. We'll pull him in and ask him a bunch of questions. But that's sort of going to be the layout. So without further ado, maybe we should get rolling on this.
We should. Let's roll for initiative to see, because I think what we should do, we talked about this. How are we gonna set this show up? What are we gonna do here? And I think it's a good idea to kind of get the lay of who we are and what we're doing, what kind of systems that we are running, and what our backgrounds are, and why we got into DMing, and maybe who this show is for will reveal itself while we do that. So yeah, we had the idea of we will roll for initiative, not talk about being on the nose. We'll roll for initiative to see who gets to talk first.
I have my tiny D20 and you have a gigantic
I have
D20.
my gigantic D20 that will probably roll nothing. Here we go. Are you ready? I'm going to roll it up.
All right, here I go.
All right. Oh. That's an oops, like you can't see it.
Oh
That
gosh,
is an 18.
I rolled a 2.
You rolled it. Well, together we make a 20.
Perfect. How perfect. Yeah, tonight's discussion topic is, like Ryan said, it's going to be our session 0. What are we doing here? How did we get here? How did we become first-time DMs? What have been some of our troubles, experiences so far? And where do we want to go? Sound good?
Exactly. All right.
Take it away, my man.
Okay. So I'll start from the beginning. So when I was in high school, D&D and like Magic the Gathering were considered like the nerdiest things you could do. So my high school history with both of these were like I avoided them like the plague, lest I face social ridicule. The nerdiest thing I did in high school was play video games, really. I was also in band, though, playing the tuba, so maybe I avoided those things for no reason.
You're really like jumping on each side of this fence here.
Oh man, I was like everywhere. But for some reason, D&D and like Magic the Gathering were like, if you do that, you are the bottom feeding social. You know, it was like you don't do it or else you'll get made fun of. So I just kind of stayed away from it. And either way, D&D was something I considered, you know, like socially beneath me. So I just never got into it. Fast forward many years later, and I got into the board gaming hobby. And that really consumed my entire life, right? So I played a ton of games that were billed as like RPG board games, which I'm sure a ton of people have played. And I always found that I really strongly disliked the narrative aspect to them. Pretty much every board game that has narrative, I find, is just bad, or I find myself tuning out. Right.
I can get on board with that. Right. Like it's just what always ended up happening for me is I'm reading from a book and everybody else at the table isn't listening. I'm not paying attention because I'm in the middle of reading.
Yeah.
And every time I've been on the other side of that, of being a player, I'm like, let's just get going. Like a lot of times I've always found myself at the table to play a board game.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. The board gaming, what I love about board gaming, and I'll get into this in a minute, is really first and foremost the mechanisms of the board game. The narrative story is not really why I'm there. for most board games. Anyway, so I played a bunch of those, right? I found that I didn't really like those, and I kind of attributed that like, okay, well, I'm probably not going to like RPGs because I don't like the narrative in board games, so I'm probably not going to like RPGs, which I think are mostly narrative driven. A number of friends of mine were into them though, and would always tell me, they were like, you'd make a great dungeon master. I would love to play a game where you're the dungeon master. And I'm nothing if not absolutely starved for praise. So I looked into it and decided I would try to GM the Star Wars Fantasy Flight RPG. I just out of cold turkey was just like, which RPG would I like? I typed in RPGs. I was like, oh, there's a Star Wars one. I like Star Wars. So I bought the core book for Edge of the Empire, which is basically like a fucking collegiate textbook. And I was instantly overwhelmed, man.
It's kind of a complicated system, and that game specifically is, I think you would be a good GM for that game, to be honest. But that game puts a lot of pressure on the game master because there are successes and failures, and then there is what's it called? Like the light side and the dark side or something. They're like, you can fail, but it's good, or you can succeed, but it's bad. And
right, you get like advantage or disadvantage. Even if you fail, you can fail positively, and vice versa. Anyway, so I opened the book to read it one night, and I felt stupider. I felt stupider than like my dogs when I pretend to like hold a ball and I throw it and they just pretend to chase it. I had no clue what the hell I was doing. So this wasn't like reading a rule book to a board game. And that was the first thing that I didn't know. I kind of anticipated it. I didn't know that the divide was so vast. Okay. So I assumed, I sit down over the last decade. I've sat down with a rule book in my hand and I've read through a rule book and I'm like, okay, got it. And now we're going to sit down at the table. I'm going to teach people, we're going to play. And this was nothing like that. I was expecting to find a little rule set, that explains how to win. What do I do on my turn? What do the players do? How do I respond to them and go? But instead, I saw pages and pages of like vehicles and weapons and things, and me not knowing a thing assumed I have to have intricate knowledge of all that stuff for my games, or else so it would be fun. I didn't know the cadence of what to do. I tried watching videos of how people do it, and they all sucked at showing how they got so good. I had a similar feeling when I was starting out in guitar back in high school. Metallica is my favorite band, and I remember having many conversations with my friends about like, how did they get so good? How did they go from nothing to now they're incredible musicians who, and they're very young. They're incredible musicians making this great music. How did they do that? And so I was looking for something that kind of showed how to go from literally zero to get to where you want to be. And I couldn't find anything like that.
And like Peter here in the chat makes a good point. He says he went to a Warhammer store once, had a very similar experience, right? Because it's the same way. The Warhammer rulebook is a textbook.
Yeah.
And it's like, and then later you find out half of its lore. There's a 20-page rulebook in the center. But from the outside, that's not obvious, right? And like you were saying, the Edge of the Empire or whatever, any RPG, it has tons of information for scenarios that'll come up. But it needs to have that, like, you need like a 1-page at the front. Here's the rules for the game, right?
This is what you need to know. Or even like something that says, hey, this book is, 300 pages long. You don't need to know all of this to get started. And so anyway, that was like a big foreign concept to me. I gave up at the beginning out of just fear and confusion. Board games were enough. Then one day, my good buddy and OG gamecaster Jeremy told me he was developing his own RPG called Grit. He wanted Natalie and I to play so he could show us what it was all about. And we played, and I remember really loving it. I thought it was a lot of fun. It was really simple. And I was like, no way, this isn't what RPGs are like. I still didn't really totally understand it because I was just playing like a really quick, like it was like a half-hour one-shot scenario. He was trying to just figure stuff out. Then a couple months ago, because this is all, Ben and I are both brand new at this. And just a couple months ago, Jeremy again reached out and he was like, hey, I've developed a lot more of Grit. And it's kind of, it's got legs now and I want you to try it. So Ben was even in that game with me. We played with a couple other buddies. And a light bulb appeared over my head as we were playing this. And for the first time ever, I felt like, I think I understand what this is about. And I was like, I could do that. what Jeremy was doing. He was the DM in our game. I was like, I think I could do what he's doing. This doesn't seem that hard. And then I thought, like, beyond that, like, my kids would love this. And I quickly realized that role playing, and if you haven't ever role played before, role playing is basically just improvisational storytelling as a group. The rules can be whatever the fuck. I then began researching systems to play. D&D seemed a bit too robust for my family, so I Googled RPG systems for kids, and the first thing that came up was this system called Tiny Dungeon. And you can see this book it's much thicker than a board game rule book, but this is nothing compared to like the textbook format, right?
I wish you had the Pathfinder 2nd edition book that I could show you. That's like monstrous.
I don't have the RPG. I wanted to show the Star Wars one next to it, but it's like huge. And so this is a lot more easily digestible. It's also really short. Anyway, an aside about me, I love being creative. I love it. I hate narrative in most board games, like I said, because what I love about board gaming are the mechanisms, like I talked about. Gaming mechanisms are what make me love a board game for the most part. If it has storytelling, I mostly just want to skip that, like Ben talked about a minute ago, and just get to the mechanisms.
Ryan, these are just the lore of the world that my campaign is taking place in. For just one of the continents. This is not to say that my world is complex. It is to say that role-playing games can be overwhelming. This is just, there's no rules in any of these. This is just lore.
Content, just stuff to immerse yourself in. But if you look at that and you don't know what you're doing, that's gonna put you off, because you're gonna be like, no way am I reading all that. But if you think about it differently, if you change the way you kind of like look at it, it's really just to immerse you more. It's tools at your disposal that you can choose from to throw into your game. So RPGs, I feel, they're very similar to board games, but they're the opposite in where board games are about the mechanisms. RPGs, I feel like, is all about the story. The experience, the shared experience. The mechanisms are almost non-existent sometimes, depending on what system you play. World building is fun for me. Storytelling is fun for me. Being the center of attention is almost as good as sex. So this was a recipe for incredible success. I bought the Tiny Dungeon core book from a website called Drive Through RPG, which, if you don't know about that website and you're getting into RPGs, you should know about Drive Through RPG. It's fantastic. But it arrived. I read through it. It was very short and to the point and simple and awesome and everything I wanted that Star Wars RPG to be. Like you said, there was like the first 2 pages are how to play the game. And all the rest, and it even tells you, all the rest is like, here's all the monsters you can find. Here's a couple settings that we suggest you could use. Here's a little bit about the magic system. And other than that, just kind of go and do whatever you want. And I watched some videos, and the guy running one of the sessions is just like, okay, here we go. I made up this little scenario, and, I'm watching it and I'm like, this is so easy. It's so simple. In this system, for example, the combat is just D6s. For a normal encounter, you roll 2. If you roll a 5 or a 6, you succeed in whatever you're trying to do. If it's an easy feat, or if you're proficient in some way, you get advantage and you can roll 3 D6s. If it's a hard feat, or if you have something happen to you to make it harder, then you roll 1. Either way, a 5 or 6 will succeed. Everything else is a failure. It's that simple. And there, of course, are other rules to follow. But the first thing I realized about this is just a guideline for my storytelling. And that's, I feel like, and maybe, and Ben will talk more about D&D, but a lot of these RPG systems are just that. They're just a little structure for how to tell a shared story. Varying degrees of mechanics that we all agree upon. And then the rest is pretending to be in a situation that the DM presents you with. So once I realized that, the entire world of RPGs just opened up to me. I printed off some character sheets that came with Tiny Dungeon, had my family pick who they liked based on the art. We went through and selected some stats and story arc things, and then I got to writing. I came up with a world that we play in every session called Godriel. I've told you about that before, I think, Ben. And that was the most fun part for me, coming up with the world to play in. And the limit with all of this is your imagination. After that, I had the world the way I wanted. I started to write a little story. And
I
away we went.
I love that you decided to go 100% like your own thing, right? And so because this is your first game in your first world, or the first game in your world, you built out some of it, let's say. This very like pencil drawing outline.
Yeah.
And then the player's journey through your world fills it in as they go, right?
Yes.
And so now your world can be system agnostic, right? You have a world. Let's say you go run another game in another system, index card RPG or whatever.
Yep.
We can still be in your world, and the
Absolutely.
places that your kids have gone can still be real places. Maybe they're high level NPCs that we run into. Like what's man, I can't remember any of their character names. Like
Yeah, the Rads team. Yeah, it's Raya, Ayla, Sir Dennis, and Zelda.
Yeah, right. Maybe we run into them. You know what I mean? And they're like super powerful by the time we meet. Whatever, but that's kind of cool that you get to like just sort of like make that as you go.
Well, and what you said there is a perfect point that kind of reinforces what I said earlier is that the rule sets here are really just a loose structure that reinforce the world that in the story that you're telling. Like you said, it doesn't matter what system we're playing. This world can just be played in whatever. You know, if we're going to use D&D, where we're going to go squares that are 5 feet of distance instead of using Tiny Dungeon, where it's just like a near, close and far situation. It doesn't matter. It's just whatever the group all decides that we're going to play with.
Yeah, right. It's almost it's like the rules are there to sort of like be the bumpers on the bowling alley. Like
Yep.
we can all agree on some things. When issues come up, and then different rules in different games provide different kinds of gameplay. You think about Dungeons and Dragons, what do the rules do? They talk about how strong you are at fighting things, so that when you get better at fighting things, you can fight harder things, or that there are rules for how hard a monster is, so that as you feel like you're progressing, so that you can fight the harder things, right? The whole system is set up so that you feel like you started here and then you get there. That's Dungeons and Dragons. But the one best piece of advice I ever heard for role-playing games is the rules can tell you what you can do, and the rules will tell you what you can't do. And we all agree on that. And everything that the rules don't say that you can do, or at the rule, as long as it's not said either way in the rules, that's the part that you get to play. Like, can I flip that table over and kick it into that guy? There's no rule for that. Right? And that's where you guys get to start to have fun.
Yep. An example of that we used in our game, I've talked about this before, probably on the Gamecasters podcast, but I'm playing this scenario with my kids in this Tiny Dungeon base rule set in this world that I've created. So I made this scene up where I'm like, okay, we're in a forest and you encounter some wolves, and Sir Dennis, which is my son, he's like in the middle of the thing. These wolves are attacking him. So, we roll for initiative. And so that's the turn order, basically. And then I say when their turn comes up, Lexi's turn, she's Ayla. I'm like, all right, Ayla, what are you going to do? And she's looking at the table. And in this particular situation, I have some terrain. So if you're not familiar with an RPG, there's a ton of different things. You can either do what's called theater of the mind, which is basically just I tell you where you are and you internalize that in your mind and, then talk about it. And there's nothing. It's just in your brain. Or there's a bunch of terrain and stuff you can just buy. Or you can use whatever. I used loose leaf paper for the first time and just drew some stuff on there. And so they know, like, oh, okay, he drew a couple trees and some leaves. So we're in a forest, right? Well, in this particular situation, I had actually constructed some stuff I had bought from like Amazon, and it was like dry erasable terrain. And I had some like trees that you set out. Anyway, so it was this whole like forested scene, and I had it situated. Like, here's the wolf. Here's Sir Dennis's character, and he's being attacked. What do you do? And she's like, can I sneak behind the wolf, behind this tree, and get behind him? And I was like, you can. You have to roll for it to see if you can do it, right? So she rolls 2 dice. She gets a 5, so she succeeds. So she's now behind it, and she has one action left because in Tiny Dungeon you have 2 actions to take. And so her first action was to move. Her second action, she was like, I'm going to take my spear and I'm going to shove it up the wolf's butthole and then fling it over the trees. And I'm like, okay, we'll call that a hard roll. And so she rolls it. She gets a 6. And I'm like, all right, tell me how to do. Tell me what happens. Act it out for me. And so she gets up out of her chair. She pantomimes having a spear. She's like, I walk up to him. He's focused on Sir Dennis, and he's got his butt sticking in the air because he's about to pounce. And so because his butt's sticking in the air, I see his butthole and I shove my spear right inside of it. And he lets out a scream as I fling him over the trees, and you can't see him anymore. And everyone cheered at the table. And that, like you just said, that wasn't written in a rule book anywhere. She was just in her head like, this is what will be awesome. I mean, that specifically is role play, right? She is in the scene. What would I do if I was right there? And our job is to just be like, yes, how? Right? Yeah, you can whatever you want to do, you can within reason, you can do. Tell me how you would do it, roll for it, and then we'll see if it happens. And that once you realize that makes the fun level, there's no ceiling on it. You know what I mean? It could it's whatever the hell you want it to. And that is what I think is most exciting about an RPG versus something like a board game. Where a board game, you are in a box for the most part. It's a rule box. You have to stay within the borders. And, there's obviously opportunities to think yourself out of situations and, best your competitors. And it's a whole different, itch that they scratch. But what I'm really liking about doing the RPG and specifically with my family is it's just endless possibilities of fun like that. Like shoving a spear up a wolf's butthole can happen, and we all think it's great, And so it's just like, what's gonna happen? What's gonna happen next, man?
I have a question for you, but Peter has a question first. He says that his son loves to act things out. Can you do an RPG with just a DM and one character? What do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, absolutely you can. 100% you can, I think. So for it, let's do, for instance, actually, Ben, you could probably, I mean, you don't want to go into too much detail, but you have situations set up where you might need to do something with one specific character, right? Have a session with one specific character. And it's basically the same kind of thing. If you and your son want to play, you just create a little story. Let's say your story, Peter, is, okay, we're going to find the missing crown. I ran a scenario. My first one with my kids was where there's a jewelry store in this mountain, there's a city inside this mountain, and in this city there's a jewelry store, and the owner of this jewelry store has come to you and said, hey, my gold crown has been stolen. I need you to help me find it. Your son is the one that's going to help find it, and you are going to take him through this story. You have 3 different locations set up. His first one is here, and you ask him, what do you want to do? How do you want to find this crown? You might lead him a little bit and say, oh, you find some footprints leading, to the back of the store, and maybe he goes and investigates that, and then you create what happens. Absolutely, you could do just the DM and him. What do you think about that?
Oh yeah, for sure. And I do have a couple experiences with it in our campaign so far. So we've done this once, but one of the player characters was really champing at the bit to get his sort of side story going, and I was like, all right, cool, let's kick it off. He had written a bunch of backstory stuff. And so, after the first couple of sessions, we did a midweek thing where when everybody went to sleep at night, he gets woken up in the middle of the night, and one of the other NPCs in the troop, they had to go off in the woods and potentially fight some zombies, and then found some lizard guys at a tower, and then there was a fire monk, and yeah, it was no problem. I think it does help a little bit to have. If there's one person, to maybe have an NPC with them, but have it be a good example would be if your player is the hero, then the NPC is maybe somebody who is intimidated by them, or really like looks up to them and just wants to like tag along or help. Or maybe it's somebody who's not can't fight but would know stuff. Somebody they could ask questions to, so that you have some way to like provide knowledge or something for them to bounce ideas off of instead of having to be alone the whole time. But that's just like a way to make it better. But there's no reason why you can't do it at all. In our previous campaign, oh yeah, make a few NPCs so he has companions, sure, or just one. Just one, right? So you don't have to run a bunch of people, and make them really simple. Make them really like a dude who like casts spells or only buffs, or like you don't want it to make too complicated for you.
This is a good idea too. He could also have a companion like a pony or a dog, like a familiar. So Lexi's character Ayla in my campaign has a pet cheetah named Roxy, who is just kind of always there with her. And in certain situations, she's like, I'm going to have Roxy run out and, attack and, get a squirrel to come back, and because we're hungry, and it's just stuff like that you can just role play with. And it's this little familiar that, she doesn't always use her, but in certain situations she's around.
Well, and the nice thing too, like Peter, let's say you're going to do this and you're going to run a more well-known system. So let's say you're going to run D&D, which there's an infinite amount of stuff online for D&D. You can make up how the companion works. You can make that up and decide, or you can go like look for rules for a D&D companion, and somebody has them, and then you can just use those rules. That's the nice thing is what I have found for a more complicated system like Dungeons and Dragons is if I come up with an idea, I can normally go find somebody who has written rules for how to use that idea in the game. Or the other way around, I will oftentimes read through things. Like I get a monthly magazine called Arcadia. It's a digital magazine for D&D 5e stuff. And I'll just read through that, and then maybe every other issue there's like one thing that I'm like, oh, this would be cool. But it's almost like leafing through that stuff is like eventually it'll, once in a while ignite some creativity, and you'll be like, oh, I know where I could use this, right? The problem with that then becomes you're always like, well, maybe I should get more stuff to read more stuff. And like a lot of that stuff costs money.
Yeah.
And then you end up with like tons of stuff all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Being brand new, especially, I don't have experience to pull on. So I'm always trying to pull on information. I'm trying to read to get good. And a lot of times reading requires like either seeking out or purchasing or whatever. And so, in the past 6 months, I have accumulated a ridiculous amount of supplemental material.
Well, we're similar there and different, I think, because we're similar where neither of us have the experience to draw on. And the route you're taking, and I think you should go through your kind of introductory to this in a second and take your turn. But where you have all the materials, like you just showed all those books, and you're just immersing yourself in everything and watching every video you can and doing all of this, research on the stuff that's printed. And what I'm doing is just like, I don't know, this is kind of fun. I'm going to just make this world up. I'm going to make this story up. I'm going to take the kids on it. And then in those sessions with the kids, I'm like, okay, what didn't work here? And I'm kind of just refining it that way. So I'm definitely doing a lot more homebrew and casual type of DMing. And Ben, you should go through kind of your history, and because you're doing the opposite of me. You're doing a lot more hardcore and technical stuff.
Well,
with D&D.
and I think it's worthwhile to like, focus on if this series, this Session 0 series continues, if it starts as like pulling back the veil a little bit and sort of goes through a mini version of our journey, right? When you're not playing a role-playing game, like you said, that you go to Barnes & Noble and you grab, there's a whole pile of role-playing. There's a lot of Dungeons & Dragons books, and then there's a couple other systems there. And you pull one of those off the shelf, and you're like, I don't know what any of this says. It's like a 300-page rule book, and I'm used to reading 5-page rule books.
Right.
I don't know what any of this means.
Exactly.
And then you try to watch people play, and you're like, I don't know what's going on. And so there's this mystique. And then I found even being a player character, there's the mystique to how is this run? How is this story created? How are you running all these monster encounters? How are you managing all the monsters and telling the story and putting the puzzles and the rooms and like having all this stuff where it is? Like, what's going on? And so I was always so intimidated to get on the other side of the screen because of the unknown. And hopefully we can pull the curtain back a little bit and say, you know what? It's really, there's nothing going on back there. It's just somebody just making crap up.
Exactly. And like you said, like in D&D, it's the most popular one, right? So since the 70s, people have been making stuff up for it. So a lot of people get into it because, like you said, there's already a ton of stuff to pull and draw off of, where newer systems like Index Card RPG, it hasn't been around that long. So there's not as much stuff to look at, and it's more, I guess there's definitely the two schools of thought so far that I've encountered where, either you're buying books and running scenarios off of tried and true methods, or scenarios that, okay, these work, let's use these and run these, and we'll just put our own spin on flavor on them, versus I'm just going to make every single thing up, 100% of it, just make it up.
Yeah, and so I will jump in. I'll do my whole. I will do like the same as Ryan did. I'll give a little bit of a background here, but I want to touch one more thing on what Peter's saying. Let his son build a character. I don't know what age your son is. I found that definitely, I think the best thing to do for, let's say, board game experienced people or adults or whatever, to get them into the game would be like, here is a character. We're going to start. Okay, and when stuff comes up, I'm going to tell you how the rules work. And you're going to see it that way. And they're like, oh, okay, this is really cool. What I found with my kids is that that didn't work at all, actually, because especially for Dungeons and Dragons, the rules are too complicated. So when I handed them a character that was pre-generated, that wasn't them, they don't understand. They didn't have, and they're 8 and 6. They had no previous knowledge of like what it would mean to be a wizard, what it would mean to be a fighter. Like, what does that even mean? Why do I have high dex? I don't even know what that word means. And so what worked a lot better was like, all right, let's start over. And we all sat down one day and made characters from scratch. And then when we started to play, the rules didn't matter because they were that person they had made up. Like, my kids are Dragonborn brothers from their tribe was killed or overrun or something like that. Like, they're the last ones. One's a white Dragonborn and one's a blue, and they're like these brothers, and they're both really strong. And now all of a sudden they have like something they can latch onto, and who cares what the rules are when stuff comes up? I just tell them how it works. Maybe one day they'll learn the rules. But now they're just on board for the story. Yeah, so like for me, RPGs a little bit had all this mystique. Even when I was younger, I played a little bit of AD&D when I was like 9th or 10th grade. We were really into the Wheel of Time. My buddy was like, let's play Dungeons and Dragons. I'm going to GM, and we ran some Wheel of Time game with the D&D rules, except I was like, we didn't have that like liaison to how it works. We didn't have somebody who was experienced that was like passing down the tradition. I didn't know what I was doing. I actually have my AD&D books here, and I don't have the player's handbook. Like, I don't have the rule book for how the game is played. I had a couple of expansion books for how a paladin works. No wonder I didn't have. I just always remember being like, I don't know how to play. I don't know what's going on. But we had a lot of fun until we did end up actually playing with some older guys one time. Like, maybe they were like seniors or something like that, and they actually knew how to play. And I found that kind of intimidating, and then I don't think we ever played again.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was always in the back of my head of like this thing of like, I'm a role player, right? And then for years and years, I just never touched it. My experience then getting back into it, actually Ryan Quinn, who we'll have on a little bit, he got me into board games. And we had this Monday night group where we would play campaign games. So all the games that they had. Ooh, man, what's happening behind me here? Here you go. Ooh, look at this. A beer has showed up.
Oh,
Thanks,
nice.
Emily.
I got my Arnold Palmer. My last Arnie Palmy that I got.
Your Arnie Palmy.
Yep, my last
What
Arnie
is
Palmy.
in here? I don't even know what this is. This isn't beer. She's gone.
It's mead.
That was really good. We would play campaign games. So we play like Imperial Assault is how it
Yeah.
started.
Yeah.
And that sort of fizzled out, and we played whatever, all kinds of weird campaigns, and it was a lot of fun. Eventually, Quinn pulled out this card game that he had. It was like a battle card game, like Magic or something like that, except to cast the spells, you had to hold them up. And on the back, it said the words you'd have to say to cast it. But the part that you would see was this like diagram that would tell you how to say. And the higher level spell it was, the harder it was to decipher the diagram. But if you memorized your whole deck, you would just like know it. But at first you don't know it, and you're having to like interpret it. Oh, and you had to do a symbol. There was words in a symbol to cast the spell. Nobody ever wanted to play that card game. It was kind of a cool idea, but it was a Kickstarter, and it like never came out. And Quinn was like, I really want to try this. I really want to get it done. And so he came up with this thing where he took a Pathfinder adventure module he had run with his RPG group. They'd run Pathfinder. He DM'd it. He took that, and then the combat system that we used was that card game. And so we were all like mages of some sort, right? We're all wizards. And I had so much fun with that. Man, did I love that.
That sounds great.
It was so cool. And like that was kind of the bug. So we did that. A couple years go by. We had some people leave that Monday night group. And we're like, what are we going to do now? I think we were down to 3 of us. And I was like, well, always tickling the back of the mind is like, can we play D&D? You know? Well, Quinn already had an RPG night once a week, and he was like, he agreed. He was like, I'll run a game. We're going to run a D&D 5e game. He pulled in one of the guys from the other group, so now we've got an experienced player, an experienced dungeon master, and then we pulled in 2 other guys into the group. So we had 4 new players, 1 experienced player, and the dungeon master, and we ran a year and a half, 2 years on that. I mean, we took a little break to play Imperial Assault in the middle, but he ran Sunless Citadel to like introduce us to us, and then we ran Tomb of Annihilation, which is a big D&D 5e adventure module, and then we had a little bit of a hiatus, and then he ran a couple of modules to the higher level until, again, a couple of guys moved, and that was such a great introduction. It was right in the middle of COVID, so we had like in person, and then we had to do online. We used Fantasy Grounds. That was cool. We got back in person, but Quinn would still put the TV out as the battle map because he had bought the module, Tomb of Annihilation, in Fantasy Grounds. So he had all the digital of everything. Plus, then he could run off of his laptop and run all the monsters digitally and all that kind of stuff. He could run initiative on the computer. And he was still running it like we were in Fantasy Grounds, except we didn't have computers. We were just telling him what we were doing, and he was like, all right. And he's moving stuff around on the computer. And that worked. That was cool. We should ask him about that when he gets on here.
So you have had a lot more experience than I have with actually playing. I didn't know you played for a couple of years recently as a player.
Yes.
I have played one scenario. I played a 5th edition scenario with there was 15 of us. It was awful. It was like the worst. I hated it. I was confused. I had no idea what I was doing. Again, my brain had not prepared myself for the RPG realm being so different than the board game realm. Every time I sat down to play, even when I played Grit with Jeremy the first time, I was assuming like, okay, it's my turn. What are the actions I can take? What am I trying to do to win? You know what I mean? It's almost like the difference between a baseball swing and a golf swing. It's like you're swinging your arms both times, but if you try to hit a golf ball like you're swinging a baseball bat, it's not going to work the way you want to,
Yeah.
And once you finally understand, oh, okay, it's kind of a different motion. You're still, using the same power. Then you kind of unlock the fun of it, I think. And so that was kind of exactly what happened for me with the RPG round. Once we played Grit that one time online with me, you, Mick, Dave, Mick, Mr. Measles, and Jeremy. And again, it was more just like the collection of the three of you who have all played before kind of coaching me like, yeah, that what you're saying sounds cool. Go ahead and try that, and it's like, oh, and then Jeremy taking us through the simple, scenario, because it wasn't a big story. It was basically just like, here's this girl, she's like got this acrid stuff coming out of her. She wakes up, she turns into a zombie kind of monster-y thing, and these things are chasing you. You got to run into here, and we were kind of led down this path.
It was the perfect intro too, and especially because the way that his system works is like the magic that you had didn't have necessarily defined things of what it could do. It was very generic. Like you could make a gust of wind. It was like,
Yeah.
okay, and then it was up to you to think of how would I use a gust of wind to blow a guy off of a cliff or whatever.
There were crystals. I don't need a gust of wind to blow a guy off a cliff. There was 3 crystals. I was like yeah, you're right. It was like a fire crystal, a wind crystal, and an earth crystal. And yeah, he was like, they're magical, and you decide how to use them given the constraints of fire, earth, and wind. And for the earth one, I remember we needed to get this one guy out of there, and there was a bunch of enemies in his way, and I was like, well, can I raise where he is, take that bit of earth and raise it up so he can just kind of hop over them? And he was like, yeah, go ahead. And I was like, that was one of the crystal burns, and that was really, really awesome. That was a possibility for me to do. Just anything you could think of, like, oh yeah, that's actually really cool. Okay, go ahead, roll for that. Let's see how it works. Versus something like D&D, which I've played once, I guess once and a half, I'll call it, where you have actual spells that are going to produce, a fireball that goes 20 feet in front of you.
Again, what is D&D about? Progression, right? So if you're playing a level 1 wizard, your spells suck. Why do they suck? Because a level 10 wizard spells are insane.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And a level 20 wizard spells are have godlike powers. And so because the game is built on progression, that is the heart of D&D, then at first, your abilities, even magical, are extremely limited, and there's rules around those limits. And so it is not as free of I think you would have a lot more fun if somebody dropped you in as a 5th level wizard to teach you the game, and you could be like, wow, this is awesome.
Yeah, look at me go.
And then start a campaign, and you're at level 1, and you're like, oh, damn. Well, now I know where this goes, so I understand that I am just learning this craft. A good thing that they had in that they have in some other RPGs is names for levels, like level tiers, where let's say you're an initiate when you're level 1 to 3, and then you're whatever at the higher levels, right? And then you're a full paladin once you hit level 9, right? You're not a paladin, even though your class is paladin. You're not a paladin until you've hit 9th level. And that little tiny bit of messaging goes a long way to not be misleading when you come from a game that's a lot more freeform, like a Tiny Dungeon, like a Grit or whatever, where it's if they're it's really up to you and the DM to decide how anything's going to work.
Yep.
D&D has so many constraints so that you are forced to go through those stages, right? It's like Quinn says here, D&D levels 1 through 3 should only be done once. Otherwise, start at level 3. Because a lot of times your subclass, it gets their ability at level 3. And all that other stuff is if it's almost like the prologue to the adventure.
Sure. Which, if you're doing a campaign, you got to go through. But yeah, if you're doing a one-shot. So that's kind of another thing, is what I'm doing with the family. Is it's kind of in a campaign setting, so every time we play, we pick up from where we left off, and they have all the stuff that they got from prior, but there's not an overarching story. I'm just taking them through one shot after one shot after one shot.
Mm-hmm.
Everything exists in this one scenario, and they play it, and it's done, and it's great. And then, I take a couple days and think of something else and then do it that way. So the progression that they're going through is far different than I think anything like you guys are doing in your campaign. The progression that my kids and are going through is really what cool artifacts are they finding? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's not really a big level system in something like Tiny Dungeon. It's really because you'll never roll more than 3 dice ever. You're always rolling a 5 or a 6, or 3 dice to get a 5 or a 6. But the stuff you find, all the treasure you can get, the stuff you can wear, that's what's kind of like upping them, you know? And so they're becoming really powerful because Lexi, for instance, is the spell reader, which is kind of like a magic user. And there are scrolls that they're like item cards basically that I bought that go with it. They're just scrolls and they're spells. They're one-shot spells. All the spells that are on these scrolls are just one shot. Almost like a potion you drink and it does something great and it's gone. And so I can just make up, I've made up a ton of these scrolls that I just have her find periodically throughout the one-shot adventure that she now has. She writes it down, or I write it on a little, blank card and I hand it to her, and then she can use that, like, oh, this one's a scroll of invisibility. It lets me be invisible for this one encounter. And I just make that up, but she finds a creative way to use it. And it's ways like that, they collect stuff like that to kind of buff themselves.
Yeah, so I did have, that big campaign we ran, and it was a ton of fun. And I look back on it, I maybe you're similar, Ryan. I always look back on things and critique myself. I just think of what could I have done differently. I very rarely think back on it and think of all the great things everybody else did in that campaign. I only think back of like, how could I have been a better player?
Yeah,
and I didn't
sucked.
know. We were talking about starting at level 1 and going to here and then this and that. And it's like, now that I've gone through that once, let me start over and I'll do a great job. And but we people were moving. We had to end. It got to an end. And we were at Gen Con. I was at my first Gen Con this year. And there's so much RPG stuff there. And just like running the game was kind of this thing where I was like, I want to play D&D. Can I like ask that? For so long before it came up, I was like, can I ask if we can do that? Because it's like our board game campaign night,
right?
Like, I want to play D&D. I've never played it. That's the big popular one.
Yep.
Can we do that? And then it came up and it was awesome. And it was after playing, I was like, could I run this? Like, can I? And I was like, I don't have time for that. But our game was going to end. And then what are we going to do? We could go back to playing board games. And I was like, you know what? What if I just gave it a shot, right? And I bought a module. I bought GUI Cube. They have lots of handouts, and they have for. We're not going to spend this tonight talking about GUI Cube. Maybe we could do that in a different episode. It has pluses and minuses, but it was the thing that pulled me in at Gen Con. I bought it, and I said, hey, guys, how about I run the next game? And that was pretty well received. So we had 2 people move. We pulled 2 people in who are super interested in it, but are brand new to role-playing. So now we have 3 experienced players, 2 brand new players, and then myself. And I would say off the bat, the first thing now that so our game, we started in November. Now we've been running November, December, January. If it just ended right now, I would say the 2 biggest lessons I've learned is that if I had to go back to being a player, I'd be a better player, having been on the other side. Okay. It reminds me a little bit about when in college, I took a 3rd year engineering lab. And I was like, I got through it, but I was like, what the heck's going on? And then I TA'd that class when I was in grad school. And I was like, I get all these experiments. This teaches this. It all makes so much sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you got to go through it once.
Yeah.
To get it the next time, even though you have no clue what the hell's going on the first time.
But the other thing that it has made me it has made me a better game night attendee. When you work so hard to just make, and not in a bad way, but when you put in all this effort to make game night fun, that then if a board game night comes up or whatever, you're like, I'm just so happy to be there to play anything in any way. Like my like pickiness of what we're playing or what's happening or if I'm doing good or bad has changed completely to just be like, no, I'm going to be like an interactive, like present, fun having person, because I have seen what it's like to have to try to put in all the
Yeah,
work. And
for sure.
again, not in a bad way, because I know Quinn is here listening, like not in a bad way. He did all that work for years and did a fantastic job of it. And now that I'm doing the work, and I know Seth has done it before too, you just get to see like if we're all willing to work this hard to have fun, then when we're all just going to play a board game, well, dang it, I'm definitely going to have fun. That's easy fun. That's nothing, you know?
For sure.
And so, yeah, that brings us to now, right? We're a couple months into this campaign, and I have learned a million things. I could talk all night about this kind of stuff, but I would say, so Ryan, what do you think? Like, have you learned about running games now that you've been doing it for a little while? And do you
Yeah.
think the fact that you're running for kids is making you learn the game a certain way?
I feel like I know nothing. That's what I feel like. I feel like I'm almost. We've talked about this, you and me, before, and this is another topic for another night too. But when you're like DMing, you feel like you're designing the game a lot of times. Like you're the designer, but you don't have the play test is when you're with the group on
There's
the
no
fly
play test.
live. You're
Here we
putting it
go.
into production immediately and like, oh fuck, hope it works.
Right.
And so I feel like that's what I do every time. And luckily, my kids, they are extremely there for it. They don't know that. They just know that I've come up with this thing, and I'm the game master. So everything I have is perfect according to them. Peter asked, "Has it ever not worked?" I feel like it doesn't work every time. I feel like every time I come out of it and I'm like, was that good? And then Cameron will be like, that was the most fun I've ever had. When are we playing it again? And so I'm like, okay, maybe it did work. So to answer your question, every single time I play, we've done it 13 times, I think now, which is crazy. Every single time we do it, I learn something about how I think I should make it better. So I feel like I know nothing as far as like I'm not learning the system of Tiny Dungeon more each time. I'm taking the little rules I found, some monsters, and the little basic rule set from this, and I'm taking some other things from another system, the index card RPG system, and I'm kind of like creating this homebrew hybrid game for my kids that it almost feels like I just made up. And so I'm honing my storytelling skills and my ability to say yes, because I think that was the big thing that I didn't really realize at the beginning, Ben, at the very first time. I was taking them on this story that I made, and it was almost on rails, and they were just characters in the story who would, okay, now you're fighting, and that was their agency. Who are you going to fight? How are you going to fight them? And as I've gone through with talking to you and with, just looking at videos and then just kind of reflecting back, I've started to kind of pull back and give them more of the skeleton bones of what this is and let them get through it. And that's scary because it can be easy to break if you don't do it right, if you don't prepare it right.
Yeah, well, and I think, like Janelle says, knowledge and experience are definitely a boost with RPGs. And I think the key there is like experience leads to confidence. So the best games have the most player agency, right? And letting the players
Totally
letting the players make it their story, and you facilitate that. Now, everybody is in a social agreement that unless you're making the whole game up off the cuff, which is one way to play, but a lot of times we're playing either with like you pre-wrote some story for them that this is what we're playing tonight. I bought an adventure. It doesn't make any sense for them to like go 3 towns over and let's go do a ton of experiences that don't exist, because they know that I bought this. Like everybody's fine with that because This is what we're doing. When we were running Tomb of Annihilation, we didn't like hire a pirate boat and leave Chult and go do something else because
right, or spend time creating a spaceship so you can go to the moon.
yeah, exactly.
It's like,
there's a bit the boundaries there are like like social, and then within those boundaries, though, if the more the players are allowed to decide what happens, I think the more it feels like they have an effect on the world. But then you have to have the confidence that you can keep up with them, and that I didn't have at all when we started. Right. So it's like. That is what's building over time. And, like in our last session, you're like, does it ever not go well? One of the interesting things was I was really focused on bringing more player agency into the game we're playing. And that meant changing some of the things in the module. Because the module in the beginning, this changes later. But I wanted to start bringing that in now. It was like, this happens, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens. And there was a thing where they were going up towards these castle ruins, and they're supposed to get attacked on the way, and that turns into a series of battles up to the castle, down into the basement below, through that first level dungeon, then down lower into the next level of dungeon. And I said, well, you know what? I'm going to let them decide what happens. I said, here is where all the guys are on the map. And I did a bunch of other stuff. I changed out all the stat blocks, because I don't like the stat blocks that were in the module, and I wanted to try these other fun ones or whatever. And the only thing I only changed one thing. The hunting party that is waiting on the road doesn't attack them if the players notice them. That's it. And I had to make a perception check, and they saw them. And everything after that was pushed by the players. Now, they did a bunch of stuff and used their abilities to avoid having to fight them. And one of the things I said that I thought I made a mistake was that I actually kind of like pulled the screen back a little bit, and I was like, oh man, like I changed out all the stat blocks, I made this whole boss and like all this stuff, and you guys just skipped
you didn't
all
even
that.
do it. Yeah.
And I didn't want it to sound like that. I didn't mean for it to sound like that. I was like, look at how your decision look at how beneficial the decisions you made were. And I think it came across a little bit as, oh, you ruined my fun.
Yeah, what the fuck, man? I spent all this time.
And I didn't mean it like that. And so that's where I think things can go wrong. I think it would have been better to just be like, yeah, the queen lets you through, and like not say anything. You know what I mean?
That's another thing about, because we just talked about, it's kind of like you don't have a play testing, and you're just kind of seeing if it happens. The good thing, that I've found being with my limited experience being a DM, is when the kids do something or the family does something that I wasn't prepared for, I have to kind of instantly pivot to keep them on task, or from what I've written, right? Like, for instance, I just put them through this scenario where they had to get to this city that was on an island in the middle of this giant river. And so I wanted them to, they were supposed to get a raft and then take this raft along the river until the raft eventually capsizes over this waterfall, and they basically ploosh right, and they're like right on the island now. But I was talking to Ben about this, and he's like, well, what if they decide not to do the raft and they just want to go off in the forest? And I was like, oh yeah, I guess that could potentially happen. I've led them to, okay, there's this guy selling a raft, but maybe they don't want to spend the money. Maybe they want to build a raft themselves or whatever. And so that kind of stuff, to answer Peter's question, has it ever not worked? It's almost like it can't, like it doesn't, I feel like it doesn't work the way I intend it to, but it's almost like it can't not work, because you can always just kind of like on the fly, just be like, yeah, okay, well, you try to do that. It doesn't work. You can always kind of lead them back if you need to. And I've found that way anyway. And so it's been so much fun. But you know what, man? I would love to find out what a really experienced guy has to say about all this.
Let's get a pro in here. Let's get somebody who actually knows what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So let's welcome a good friend, Ryan Quinn, to the show, a true experienced dungeon master who can finally tell us what
everything
the heck
you've
we're
said
doing
so far
wrong.
is wrong, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, exactly.
I knew it. Damn it.
Dang. Crap.
Oh, man.
No.
He's got his full display of Star Trek figurines up
Yeah.
behind him.
And you bought that just for tonight, huh?
Actually, they came out during the Star Trek D list we did almost a year ago now, which I think all your fans are clamoring for yet another Star Trek movie D list.
I'm clamoring. That was one of all the bad movies we've watched, that one was probably one of the better ones, to be honest. Maybe just because I like Star Trek.
Yeah, Star Trek is just fun.
But yeah, no, it's funny because you guys got me thinking, so I had to quick check and see how long I've been DMing because I really didn't remember when I had started. But I went back and fortunately Amazon still had the date of my purchase of my first adventure book, so I could.
No shit. When was it?
It was in 2012. So I've been DMing for almost 11 years now.
Ooh,
so
were you a player for a lot longer before that?
No, because I think I only was a player because we did. So Mitch, our friend Mitch, was the DM for just a couple of us, and we ran 2 adventures, I want to say, before then. And then he was kind of done DMing, and so I said, "Well, I'll DM instead." So I went ahead and picked up the stuff and gave it a try, and I kind of ran from there. So.
What?
But that was Pathfinder was the original one because this was like in 2012. That's when the only choices was Pathfinder or D&D 4E. Of course, you could always go to old stuff, but that's the current version, which had all of its problems. That it had. So
had you always wanted to do something like that? Like why or rather, why just in 2012 did you start? Why didn't you ever RPG before then?
So I did actually RPG before then, just never in a DM capacity.
Gotcha.
So if I go all the way back to my junior high days, then I did a system called GURPS, which I don't know if you've heard of before.
No.
It stands
I've heard
for
the term.
So it stands for Generic Universal Role Playing System, which it's put out by oh my gosh, I'm blanking right now. Who does it? But anyway, it's a very open system. I mean, as far as it's a very generic system, I guess by its name, it's very generic. But it's not like D&D is very fantasy, and I guess people have released extra rules to
SJ Games. It looks like.
Yeah, Steve Jackson Games. Thank you.
Oh, it's Steve Jackson. Oh, yeah. That's funny.
So yeah, the system is very open. I mean, they have source books for anything that you can imagine, everything from fantasy to magic to current day paranormal horror, atomic, 1950s, retro, stuff and future stuff and anything. I mean, the one downside with GURPS is there's almost essentially no pre-built campaign stuff. I mean, they basically release lots of source manuals for things, but they kind of leave it up to the DM to build their own stuff.
That's great. That's kind of my style.
But of course, as a junior high student, we basically only really did. I bought a few of the stuff, and a few of my friends and I just kind of used the combat system to kind of just do some battle royale arena type stuff just to mess around. We never I bought several books when I was junior high, the different source manuals with the thought that I would have an adventure, and I started trying to write one, but we never really did any what I would call real adventure with it. So I kind of had that bug in the back of my head for a long time, wanting to do it. And then similarly with your story, Ben, with people moving, Seth's group, his Pathfinder group opened up 2 slots when 2 people moved away and left town, and so they were looking. So myself and Dave Edwards joined that group, and then we went from there.
So since you're in your modern days of running games, have you always run modules out of a book?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I guess for me at least, I guess my time, much like your time, is always very short. And so I made the decision that I'd rather have a pre-built. Now, the pre-built, I think I've always treated as a starting point because I'm happy to make changes on the fly. And I think as I did it more and more, I got more and more comfortable with those on the fly changes, which kind of culminated in those infamous solo campaigns I did over the summer, which I did 100% ad hoc. I came in with just the most basic framework of a story, and I said I want to try just letting the characters do whatever they want to do, and I'm just going to come up with what's happening on the fly, along the way. And I thought those actually turned out quite good. Like Ura Devon's, I think, was by far the best of the three that I did, but even the other ones too, I thought ran pretty well with having such a minimal framework to base everything on.
Well, I think it was pretty unanimous that even when we were running the big module, that anytime we would get you off track and you were having to run off of the cuff or outside of the lines, that was always the best stuff.
Yeah.
And the only thing that ever tripped you up was trying to get it back on the rails when we would go meet somebody who had completely different properties than what you had made up for them on the fly.
Well, it didn't help that Tomb of Annihilation is quite the open adventure. I mean, it's kind of like it starts out very much, railroading. You arrive in the initial city, and there's a little set of stuff you do in that initial city. Pretty standard, starting for a campaign. Then it releases you into the openness of Chult, which is the continent that it's set on, and it's massive. And there are 30 or 40 points of interest that you can go to, and it's basically a giant map that it's like, go explore, have fun. I kind of prodded you to like, I planted a few hooks and said, here's some things to go do. And you promptly ignored the first couple that I gave you. And then, so.
Well, I definitely understand now how you would be like, okay, so there's a fork in the road in front of you. Which way are you going to go? Can you tell me so I know for next week? Like now I totally get that you need to be like, okay, then I'll look down that path.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, so I tried to do that, but I mean, I also just did the stuff where, okay, you reach the fork in the road. The thing I want you to do is on the left. If you take the right path, I just move the stuff over to the other way.
Totally.
I mean, that's all the magic. Like I said, I gave you a heavy hook to go to some fort right outside of the opening town, and you guys had no interest going there and left. And I was like, crap, there's a important NPC you're supposed to meet, so I just had you find her along the road on your next path, because I was like, I can't not have this NPC because she's important for other things that are going to happen down the road. So those are the type of things that you're constantly doing.
So how long did it take you to make that like a shorthand? Like, so if you talked about, you came in, you had kind of like the bare bones kind of thing, you let the players decide. Yeah. Like on the one case, what if you have players, like how do you deal with players who aren't being as creative as you need them to for not having much there? What happens if they're just kind of relying on you, to set something up, but you don't really have a ton, like how do you deal with that? And how long did it take you to become adept at handling those situations?
I guess I can say that I haven't really run into an issue of my players being not creative enough. I mean, if anything, I have a problem with my characters being too creative and trying to do stuff. I mean, Ben knows that Gage was quite the role player when it came to doing things that were so far outside of the box of what I expected that I constantly had to on the fly make those adjustments to it. So
yeah, there's no question that he was in character. It's just that nobody necessarily liked his character, but he certainly was role playing.
Yeah.
Well, and a good example. This is the best example that comes to the top of my head of something that I know you were having to do, is that we ended up in a red dragon's lair, and it was way too powerful for us, right? But we insisted on fighting it. Gage was like Scrooge McDucking in its gold hoard, and everyone else was trying to fight this dragon. And you had to decide. I think from a DM's perspective, it would have been really easy to just be like, either like knock somebody out or have it be its normal strength or whatever, and have it. And I still am on the fence of like, should you have had that dragon just kill us?
Because I didn't know how bad it was going to be until I rolled its breath attack the first time, which was like a big old cone strike that hit 4 or 5 people because you guys all lined up nice and neatly right in front of the dragon. And I rolled the damage and I went, holy crap, I can do this.
They're dead.
every turn if I want to. I mean, they weren't dead from that, but I mean, I knocked everyone's health down by more than half their total health. And I was like, this is something I can do every turn if I choose to. So I was like, I think I'm going to on the fly say that I can do this every third turn or something just to. And then luckily everybody like scattered after that first one when they realized, oh crap, let's not line ourselves up to all, be in the path of this. So.
Well, I want to jump on Joe's question here in just a second, but the thing about this red dragon scenario that I want to point out is, so you on the fly change that right to not party wipe, and what it turned into was probably the most memorable scene from that campaign, where up through a bunch of creative shenanigans, the wizard of the party ended up on the dragon's back as it was trying to flee to get away, and then like stabbed it and killed it in flight and crashed down in the woods.
Yep.
And that was his ethos. That was his. He was a superhero the rest of the campaign because of that. And like the stuff that you did to make that happen seems so wrong from a how should a DM play Dungeons and Dragons perspective. And like the rule of cool of how that went and turned out to be the most fun thing ever.
Yeah, I mean, I talked to Mitch afterwards about that, and he was like, "You should have killed the whole party." That was his response when I said what I had to do to like, because I was like, easily I could have party wiped if I had played rules as written and module as written. It would have been a party wipe, unless you guys ran away. But thus far, you guys never showed any inclination to ever flee in the middle of a battle. So
so let's talk about that party wipe. Had you party wiped, and to fold into Joe's question here, if people die in D&D, is the campaign over? What happens when somebody dies?
I mean, I guess it all depends on your setting too, because we did with Mitch, we did the Curse of Strahd, which is another pretty famous D&D campaign they have put together, that the one that was recently updated for 5e, and like that one has a lot of death in it. Now in that campaign, basically one of the first places that you visit, spoilers, you meet some priest who says, "Oh, thank you for helping me on this problem I had. I will grant your party 3 free revives." And so, as long as we could drag the bodies back to the
you could bring them back
the
to
priests, we could bring them back to life. So, I mean, we used all of those revives throughout our campaign. But I mean, I guess from there, when people started dropping, we would basically, when the first person dropped, we were like, "Oh crap, this is too hard. We got to leave and come back," kind of a thing. So, in that campaign is a little bit different because we kind of had that safety valve out there for us. If it happened in our campaign, I don't know, I would probably have to do some GM bullshit and like have somebody else, like, because I don't know if if you had met what's his name, the NPC that everybody hated.
I don't remember that guy's name because I hated him.
Crap, I'm drawing a blank on his name, but there's an NPC that I don't think you had met yet at that point, that I could have just brought in as a cavalry saves the day kind of a thing, and then have him just get you guys to a healer somewhere. I don't know, because I really wouldn't be very interested to party wipe and reroll characters. I think that would have been a big downside for everybody.
So what does that look like though, Ryan? So like let's say you're playing in that dragon's horde and the wizard gets on top of the dragon and he falls off the dragon and in flight and dies on the ground. What happens next?
Well, I mean, so I guess if you're doing rules as written, though, unless you take damage equal to your entire max health at once, you aren't dead. You are dying.
Okay.
And so, you can make death saving throws, or if you're near your party who isn't already down, they can come over and make a medicine check to stabilize you, so that you're basically at 0 health. You're not conscious, but you're not dying anymore. And essentially, once you get 1 more hit point up, then you're conscious again. So, even had, Evan fallen off the dragon and hit the ground and died, Seth was literally right there. So he could have, put a potion down his throat or something and probably at least stabilized him. So 5e does give you a lot of wiggle room on death.
It's hard to die.
And that's what, yeah.
Sure.
But like you could also say that, oh, the dragon was way too far away by the time he fell off to where you could get to him, and
Yeah.
he's definitely gonna die, and or whatever. Like like having played through a campaign now and then now having run a game, if I went back to play, I'd be a lot more comfortable with if I do something stupid, like jump on a flying dragon's back and fall off when I have like the hit points of a wizard and die. That's my fault, not yours.
Yeah.
And I think I would be way more willing to do stuff like that and die and be like, "Ah, damn, well, I guess I got to roll somebody. That guy died. You
Yeah.
know, like I got to roll a new character. And
Well, the other thing too is that, but I guess the Tomb of Annihilation did have one more outlet, because if you remember, the whole basis of the story is there was the death plague, I think it's called, that was affecting resurrection magics. So
oh, right.
I totally could have had some BS where you died, but then your corpse suddenly sprouts up, as part of this whole death curse thing, just to kind of keep it going. And then I could have, I think in the back of my head, I always had that as my like ultimate out if somebody died, as a way to bring them back in some fashion. Although I would probably put in some, because I could build that into the story, because the campaign had, I mean, that was the whole thing, is there was this death plague that was affecting resurrection magics across the whole planet, whatever, that was somehow centered in Chult. So it would give me an out to at least play with some resurrection in some fashion.
And I think to answer your question, Joe, if one person dies in the party, like dies, that doesn't end the campaign necessarily. They just kind of make a new character and somehow come back in.
Some random dude shows up and joins in.
And I want to be even part of the party. But if the entire party gets wiped out by the dragon's fire, yeah, it's probably unless he does some sort of fancy footwork, then I guess that would potentially end the campaign. But that would just be terrible for everybody.
Then coming up right behind them was another adventuring party with a dwarf named Dordrak instead of Gordrak, and he's they trip over their dead bodies. I heard one time a really good thing: if the party has gotten in a situation where they are gonna die, then you say, okay, and we pause that timeline and have everybody roll up like another party and have them coming into that same area from a different direction, and they come upon them just as they're about to get like struck down, and now you have both parties there, and then everybody can decide who they want to play from there. Yeah,
that's really funny.
It's essentially you could do whatever you want, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're always with DM. You can do whatever you want. You can pull anything out of your back pocket and be like, "Yep, that was always what I planned to have happen." Wink, wink, and then just move on. I mean, I've always been very hesitant to kill characters until I knew that we had a pretty easy way to revive. I mean, you'll note that I sure let Gage die when he put that cursed crown on his head, but I knew that you had Revivify, so it wasn't going to be a big deal, other than, oops, he forced you to expend a pretty high spell slot, outside of combat.
You were like giddy. He's like, I put the crown on my head, and you're like, okay. And then he's like, I touched the staff tip of the crown, and you're like, which end? He's like, the silver end. You die.
For the record, though, that was the end that had the black skull on it. So, it's not like it had a warning label on it. But
see, it all services the story. So you're not just going to kill the party because that will also likely kill the mood. So a thing that we were talking about, Joe, because he's asking another question about, do players tend to play a bit more fast and loose with death since it's harder to die, or is the fear of death and remaking a character make people cautious? And I'll let you answer this, Ryan. What I was gonna say with my limited experience is whatever seems the most fun and services the story is usually what path you go down. So like Ryan killing off him for touching the crown, that was like, what a cool moment that is, knowing in the back of his mind he's not actually dead. He's going to be able to be revived, but now he's going to remember, all right, this sucks, but I'll let you answer that, Ryan, that question about do players tend to play more fast and loose with death since it's harder to die?
I mean, it's going to be all based on your DM, though. Like I said, Mitch, our friend that also did the stuff, he has no qualms killing party members left and right. So, with that in mind, I mean, I was always much more cautious, and I was happy to evacuate or run away from battles if I knew that these were unwinnable once we got into them. Which I don't think. I mean, Ben, you can comment. You never even crossed your mind ever to run away from a battle that we had done in the Chult campaign.
No, and it's like you said, it's like the DM, right? Like I kind of felt like you had our backs a little bit because we were all new players. It's just like in our campaign right now. Could you imagine? I would never think to like put Stephanie's character in a situation where she would die and have to roll up a new one.
Mm-hmm.
You know it.
Yeah, it sounds terrible.
But with maybe some of the experienced players, if there's a super dangerous situation in front of you and you knowingly do something dumb, like you know the game well enough to be like, I understood the consequences. Where when we were new players and when they're still Dylan and Stephanie are new players, they're not necessarily like the DM's going to kill me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This is the only character I've ever played. I am this character, and this character is me.
Right.
That's where they're at right now. That's where I was at when I was Gordra.
My kids are like that. They, Cameron, who's Sir Dennis, he's like this knight, and he was in a situation where he was bitten by a zombie, basically, and every 15 minutes in real time, I would have him, take another wound. And my plan was if he didn't find the cure to heal his, zombie curse, once his health ran to 0, he was going to then turn into a zombie. And he didn't know that's exactly what was going to happen, but he knew something like that was happening. And so every 15 minutes, you stop and you start throwing up, and I'm like, you'd lose a health. And healing potions would not work. Nothing would. And so he was like freaking out to the point where he was almost had tears coming down. Like he was like, I can't lose. Sir Dennis cannot die. And just that fear was enough to make it great. You know what I mean? Yeah. I wasn't going to kill him. I wasn't going to, they were going to find the cure, and they did. And he commented even afterward. He was just like, that was really stressful. But I think I like that more than just I walk in with my sword and I chop everybody's head off in one go.
Yeah. I mean, I think the key thing you should always consider as a DM is making the experience as fun as possible. The rules are there to kind of give you guardrails on what you should and shouldn't do, but you should never feel bad that you had to bend a rule or bend how you thought a module was going to run if it services the players having a good time, which really that's the most important part. I mean, I guess you could have an antagonistic DM who's all there to get the characters, but I don't think I'd want to play in a campaign where you had an antagonistic DM. The DM should be kind of reading the room, and I mean, maybe your whole party is totally into character death, and in that case, maybe they're just itching because like, hey, I ran this wizard for a while, but I wouldn't mind trying a sorcerer now instead. So go ahead, kill my character anytime, and I'll bring in a new character, no problem. So it's all about what your characters are actually interested in or what they're doing there.
So Quinn, you have plenty of experience on both sides of the screen.
Yep.
So I'm going to ask you the same question for both sides. When you are on the DM, what is the most fun for you on that side?
I think for me, it's the most fun is when characters do something unexpected, but like in a good way, where, and I think you've already probably run into this a few times where you had a plan and you kind of like in your head, like, okay, they're trying to sneak past a guard. So, okay, what's they can do? Okay, they can fight the guard and kill him. Oh, okay, they can sneak behind the guard. Okay, whatever, but then you sit down and play and someone says, okay, I'm going to go up and seduce the guard and, distract the, and it's just like,
I'm going to offer him a coffee.
Yeah, or whatever. And so you're just like, okay, this isn't at all what I expected, but, I'm going to just roll with it.
Right,
and,
let's let them do it.
Yeah, and so like those like little tidbits that kind of build up over time, or because in my head you guys have no idea what the quote unquote right way to do something.
True.
But just having those little experiences are always kind of fun. Or if you guys solve what I think is a particularly complicated puzzle, because some of the content, there are like true puzzles where there's not a like roll you have to make. It's truly, you as in Ben or you as in Seth, figuring out how to solve something versus, oh, I just rolled some dice and I got a 19 on my whatever check and then it just passes. Having the players have some agency, in solving the puzzle is kind of fun too sometimes.
So let me take it one step further from that question. In your mind, what makes a good player?
I guess it's somebody who is, very, I don't want to say easygoing, but at least open to maybe things not going exactly how they planned it. I mean, again, I'm always going to try to make it fun for the player. So if I'm not allowing you to do something or I'm saying, oh, that's not going to work, there's probably a good reason for it.
Right.
Again, going back to our Cholt campaign, one of our characters was able to, he wanted to steal a dinosaur. There's dinosaurs in Cholt, in the current day, whatever. But so he stole one. And I was like, that's kind of a fun thing. Sure, go ahead. But then once I realized and checked the stat block for the dinosaur, I was like, holy crap, this thing is more powerful than all of the characters combined. So I had to say, okay, you stole the dinosaur, great. But oh no, it was one that was trained as a pack animal only. So it, can't engage in combat at all, which is purely a balancing thing, because if I had allowed the combat stats to come into play,
it's now OP.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been completely useless, but I still, gave him the joy of he was able to sneak in and steal the dinosaur. He has a pet, it has some utilitarian, thing to it. I said, oh, it's a pack animal, so you can, put stuff on it. But, so like, again, like he really wanted to use it in combat and I just had to put my foot down and, as a DM, having your characters have fun doesn't mean, oh, you always agree with them. It's
True.
all about, sometimes you have to give them the bitter medicine to what will make a better experience overall, even if it's,
Could you just have nerfed the dinosaur and made it not as powerful?
I mean, that could have been something too, although that campaign had a major problem of too many NPCs because I mean, by the end, we had as many NPCs as we did player characters, and running all of those was becoming quite the chore. So we finished that campaign, and I told everybody, because Ben has a like 3 or 4 hour debrief that he recorded that maybe could show up sometime.
Nice.
As part
Now
of
that we have a good
session 0.
Yeah, now that we have a place for it, I think it would be worthwhile to probably edit that down into
Not the raw footage, but I'm sure you could get some tidbits out of there that can be some jumping off boards. But one of the things I said, because I was still DMing after Chult to do some other ones, and I told everybody, hey, listen, the NPC load became way too much, and so I said, any NPC that comes on board in our next campaign, you don't expect them to last much longer than a session or two, because I'm going to be offboarding NPCs every opportunity that I run into, because, well, first off, it's not very fun when an NPC is, doing major combat when the party should be doing it. So I mean, it kind of robs them of those moments. And plus, I think it was slowing down combat a lot, because
sure, you have so many more turns to take.
There's so many more turns to go through, and it's taking away the successes the players think that they're achieving. I mean, part of the problem was I was running all the NPCs, and I think, Ben, you've done something slightly better in that you gave NPCs to individual player characters and spread them out so that, A, it takes the burden off you a little bit, and B, it kind of puts those back in the player characters as far as taking agency in the decisions that are happening.
Well, and I think, I mean, you did a good job of running everybody. And I'm having a hard enough time running the monsters, and I was like, I'm not gonna run NPCs too. I was like, you guys, somebody out there is gonna have to do this, right? So, but
yeah, I mean, that definitely falls into the category of, you have to really balance your NPCs in your party, and I think we had way too many by the end, because the problem is that campaign just gave you so many opportunities for NPCs, and but the campaign as written did not give any off-roads for NPCs. I guess I wonder if they're ahead, if they thought that they'd be dying so much that you'd be replacing them all the time, but because I wasn't killing characters as much, I guess maybe I was a problem of my own creation. But
So then,
Okay.
the same question for the other side. What do you find fun on the player side? What do you like that you're when it what maybe I'm being a little bit selfish with this question. What do you want your DM to bring to your game when you're the player?
Um, I guess I mean similarly, again, it's a two-way street. We're both trying to have fun, and so I would hope that the DM would read the room, kind of, try to make the experience as fun as possible, deviate when necessary, from the stuff. But on the same hand, I may have my desires, but I'm happy if
Do what's
tell me
best for the
no.
group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, saying no is probably one of the best things that you can do, which is why I pretty much always start with the default. Anytime someone comes to me, and my default is always no, but convince me to say yes.
Interesting. No, that's a really
Because
good tidbit of information.
because I mean,
Okay.
most characters are going to come to you and they're going to say, "Oh man, I found this
Outlandish
magic.
stuff.
I want this magic item. Can I have it?" And so my first response without even looking at it is always no. But then, okay, now convince me why you think this is a good fit right now in the campaign. Because
Interesting.
yeah, if and oh no, my camera died.
We lost
But
you.
I got
That's
my
okay.
audio. But
So you wanna be able to turn into a phoenix once a day that has 200 hit points and does 8d6 fire damage on every attack?
yeah,
No, you
exactly.
can't do that.
But then a
So
1 in 5 chance of dying every time it happens.
Yeah, because you're a phoenix, right?
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay, I like that because it's funny. You always hear about, as the DM, your job is almost like like an improv troupe where you always want to say yes. So it's an interesting perspective to hear that I default as no unless you can convince me that
yeah.
it's good for
Well,
the group or good for the story.
and I guess it depends too. So honestly, if I go back and think about it, I said yes to every request that Phil came to me with, because every time he came to me, he picked out some item that basically was something fun to use outside of combat that provided interesting story opportunities. I almost always started with no for everybody else because I want this weapon that increases my attack powers in combat.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and that's the part that's the hardest to balance. I can balance outside of combat stuff very easily. I mean, adjusting a DC for what you're trying to do, or changing which check you're going to make, or having characters come up with creative solutions is very easy to balance when you're outside of combat. But in combat, there's some pretty hard numbers that you're constantly going to run into. And so having a player character suddenly get a new uh, better weapon, well, it does two things. One, it creates damage envy, I guess I'll call it,
Yeah.
where, because multiple times I had one-on-ones from people who said X person is OP in combat, I want to do better. I feel like I'm not doing anything in combat. And so if you grant one person a better weapon, you're probably going to end up granting everybody a better
Now you're
weapon.
all too strong, too imbalanced.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then that just makes all the combats harder to do.
Well, when every magic item that Phil's gnome bard has was goat figurines that he could throw out and would turn into real life size goats.
Yeah, but he was using them for like he used them for all like weird outside of combat stuff,
Right?
So
They were always triggering traps for us.
yeah, and that I found that honestly I found it funny. So and like he wanted a ring that, oh, what was it? It was a ring that would let him like see the emotional state of other people or something like that. It wasn't like a mind reading, but it was like emotional state or
How
something.
are they feeling?
Yeah. And so like that's kind of a fun thing because he could use it a few times during NPC interactions when we were not in
Sure.
combat to kind of get the lay of how things are going, which I kind of can use that too to kind of push the characters down a certain path, like, oh, this person feels untrustworthy or this person is whatever.
Right.
And
This
so
guy's
like
really horny.
yeah, and so all of those provided some really good role-playing opportunities. If somebody wants something special that I think will open up interesting role-playing opportunities, I am all for it. If they come to me and say, I want this because it'll let me do more damage, like I said,
You're more reluctant. Yeah.
yeah, I want you to convince me why you think you need this. Now, by the end of the campaign, I finally started when we were on our like fourth or fifth campaign of the different modules I was running, I really started loosening up a little bit because I knew that we were reaching the end, and I wanted everybody to start having all of their wishes fulfilled that I kind of held back for so long in the combat, or for all the combat stats. But then I'll tell you my trick for what to do when combat starts getting a little bit unwieldy. For all this, which is just lie about HP. HP means absolutely nothing.
Yeah, right. You make it all up.
You just run combat until you feel like they've done enough damage to kill the creature, and then you kill it. I mean, that to me, that's the ultimate way I can balance combat.
For sure.
You just stop tracking HP and you just use vibe to determine when the creature is killed.
That's what I do in my system. My kids always ask me, they're like, how much damage does this guy take? And I'm like, you don't know. That's nothing you know. You got to keep attacking it until, at least one more.
I mean, because Ben was talking about how I was using the Fantasy Grounds locally on a TV screen, that I had mounted on the table.
Yeah.
And that one has the unfortunate thing where there's a dot on each character. That's basically green when they're at 50% or more health, yellow when they're 25 to 50, and red when they're less than 25%. And so every time I typed in the damage, into the tracker or whatever, it would, change it automatically. But people would always be watching, like, did it change?
See it. Oh, he's red
yellow?
now.
And so like I kind of could use that, as like, okay, you're making progress, but then either, they said, oh, I did 50 damage. And I would type in, oh, you did 5 damage, or whatever, or I would on the fly just quickly modify the max HP to some other number, to change it. And so, and again, it's all about reading the vibe of the room. Like, when we do a mini boss battle or a major boss battle, you shouldn't one-shot it. I don't care if everyone's characters have been min-maxed so that you can one-shot it, but, stretch it out. And so that's why it's always a way to do that. Is at one point, and I mean, I'll admit it, I had to start doing it by the end of our previous campaign because everybody got too powerful, and I don't know. I don't think there's any system out there that doesn't suffer from the exponential power curves, that you eventually just hit a point where everything just balloons out of control and there's not much you can do. And I mean, we got to
over then,
because we made it to level 12, I want to say. Was that right, Ben? So we made it to the 5e level 12. And by that point, everybody was whipping out spells and abilities that was just making combat, honestly, making it a little bit boring, because I had to like do so much, GM bullshit behind the screen
to make it hard.
Just to make it hard enough to keep it going. And it's just like, I felt like it was a good time to stop the campaign, where if we had proceeded on, I would have said, okay, it's time for everybody to roll up new characters, because it was just getting to that unfun stage where, I mean, D&D 5e, I think, has done quite a bit to linearize the power curve so that it is progression every level, but it's not so bad. Pathfinder is absolutely horrible at the power curve, where it just grows out of control, and you can get to the point where, and much sooner, I think too. I think by level 10, you're already in the uncontrollable power curve that just, because I mean, so the previous campaigns that I ran were in the Pathfinder system, and that's what the first time I discovered I'm just going to do HP until I feel like they've killed it, because everybody min-maxed their characters so much that they one-shot at the final boss. Seth's character walked up to the final boss, swung his sword, and then it was dead. And I just stared at the screen, and I'm like, we've built up this whole campaign to this
for one shot,
and you swung your sword and killed it on one hit. And I said, absolutely not. Well, I didn't say it. I just thought to myself, absolutely not. You guys have to earn this a little bit more. So, I just started, tracking the damage and going from there, and just, I'm like, I'm going to make this battle fun. So,
well, and that kind of brings me to a question that's been on my mind a lot lately. What systems do you have, the ones you've run? What do you like? And the other question I have is, are you like still open to trying other systems? There's so many RPG systems out there. Are you open to it?
I think so. I mean, so like I've done D&D 5e. I've done Pathfinder 1.0. I've done GURPS. I've done Starfinder. I did, oh goodness, some Cthulhu thing that Justin did that it's escaping me right now what the system is called.
Was it Call of Cthulhu?
No, it wasn't Call of Cthulhu because it was a generic like end of the world type scenario.
Oh, okay.
All flesh must be eaten. It's a zombie based system, and that might be it.
Wow.
So those are all the systems I've played. I've only DM'd Pathfinder, All Flesh Must Be Eaten, GURPS, and the 5e.
And you did
stuff.
that one. Shoot, what the heck is that
Oh,
card game?
Serpent's Tongue is the one that you were talking
Yeah.
about.
Where you hold up the card and say the spell name?
Yeah, I mean, it was a Kickstarter that they basically got the first, like had big giant plans. They got the base sets out, and then they ran out of money, and then the whole thing collapsed in on itself. But I got the base sets out, and so because it was meant to be a collectible card game thing, that they were going to have expansions and all of that, but it collapsed in on itself after the first set of cards they released. So, but I mean, I backed way too high for it, and so I had many cards and I just never. I always thought it looked interesting, but we just never used it, and so I ran my all-time favorite Pathfinder campaign module, which is the Harrowing, and just modified it to all the story stuff was done exactly as the book was written, but the combats I changed all to run in the Serpent Tongues system. So, because actually I think I had it where you guys were running as yourselves, quote unquote, like the characters, like Ben was Ben in the campaign. And
You've
so
been transported to this fantasy world.
Yeah, they went to some park or something, and there was a tent with a fortune teller who told their fortune with a special deck of cards, and the cards were magical, and they found themselves warped to this vaguely storybook fantasy land, but with a twist. And I'll leave it at that for anybody who wants to actually run it, because I think it is one of the best modules that Paizo ever released. I guess I'm assuming they publish it, but for Pathfinder at least, it was one of the best campaigns I've ever ran.
Wow. So us being new to the DM GM world, do you have any kind of like tips, tricks, advice that you would give to somebody like us just starting out?
I guess don't be afraid to make mistakes. I mean, I know that when I first got behind the screen, I was always just sweating bullets of, I'm going to make a mistake. I'm going to mess up a rule, or I'm going to do a story thing wrong, or, whatever. And, nobody knows when you made a story mistake. It's so you can always, you can cover your tracks very easily. And, after a while, I got very comfortable when I said, okay, roll this. And someone at the table says, wait, isn't the rule actually this instead? And I go, oh yeah, you're right. Okay, let's just do that instead. I mean, it's not like someone's going to get mad at you because you didn't memorize a 300-page rule book.
Right, exactly.
So, I mean, yeah. So I think I feel like when I first started doing all this, that I kind of held back a little bit because I was afraid to make mistakes, and you really shouldn't be afraid. I think you're better off, swinging for the, the home run, for all of that.
Interesting.
So,
okay.
But yeah, don't be afraid to make mistakes, and I guess prep is very important. I mean, I know I talked about how I tried to run, blind campaigns there before with the most basic structure, but that was after I had been DMing for close to 10 years before I tried to do a true, completely from scratch. So
right, so you're leaning on all the past experience you have to get you through situations.
But I mean, like when we had, every Monday was RPG night, and usually every Sunday night I sat down and kind of wrote out, try to think about what I was going to do in that session. And I mean, you don't want to overscript it either. You don't want to be like, okay, this is exactly, step 1, step 2, step 3, because of course your characters are going to be going crazy, potentially what they're going to be doing. But especially if you're running a module from a book, just read ahead the next couple of sections. Although I think, as Ben has already figured out, you can think that you've read far enough in advance before, and your characters can rip through content much faster than what you thought it was going to take.
That's true. Yeah.
So, but doing some prep work, even if you just like glance through, because like in those cases where I had to go beyond the areas where I read in detail, I at least had glanced through like the next several chapters, whatever, so I at least had a vague idea of what was happening, and the specifics I could just read the room description as I was reading it, and then when the characters were kind of talking about what they wanted to do, you quick glance down and say, okay, what are the traps in this room, what monsters can they trigger, what whatever else can happen in here. So so it's with a little bit of prep work can go a long way for it, for that.
So how is Ben doing
as a DM?
Oh,
I think for a first time DM, okay, Ben, take those headphones off.
Yeah.
They're absolutely horrible. I can't believe that he's actually
he's the worst, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely the worst. Oh my gosh.
We're all doing this just to
Thank you for saying such nice things.
Oh yes. And I mean, Ben's the best. I mean, I really can't
He's
say
so great.
anything.
That's all we were saying before.
Yeah. No, but I mean, for a first time DM, I think you've been doing quite a good job, Ben. I mean, it's been I've quite enjoyed the story. I think that you are doing a good job on balancing combat versus
role play.
Role playing type stuff. And I'm very happy to hear that, much like me, you sometimes look at a room and what combat is in there, and you're like, oh, there's no reason to run this because the party will rip through it. But if we actually run it, it's going to take an hour or more to run that combat, and it's not going to be anything, interesting or worthwhile for the party.
You said modules typically have too much combat. We have probably run 20% of the combats that are in the module. It's like insane. Like, why would you fight every 5 seconds like that?
I really don't understand why they have it set up that way, unless there's some parties that are just like, they love having basically minor bits of role playing stretched between their combat sessions.
Is that inherent to D&D? Maybe is D&D more combat oriented than most systems?
Because D&D is a resource. It's a resource game where you are supposed to drain the player's resources over the course of a day, right? A day, then they get a long rest. The resources all reset, and so you're like have to have a number of encounters at which all their spell slots get spent, all their once a day abilities get spent, all of their this and all their that. But the problem is that combat is only fun sometimes.
Yeah. Well, especially too when it's like, oh, we've been fighting these spiders all the time, and then you get to the next room and you open the door and you look at the description, and it's like 2 spiders jump out and fight the party, and you're just like,
again.
Yeah.
We just fought these spiders. Yeah.
I mean, D&D 5e does provide narrative combat as an option, and I think you'll notice, Ben, that I really started using that much more frequently in our later campaigns, because it is a way that you can do some quick combat without getting the map out. I mean, when you know the combat's not going to be that hard, and it's basically going to boil down to character runs up and strikes the monster right in front of you, it is a way that you can kind of run it more quickly. But even narrative combat can be a drag sometimes. So I don't know. I was never a fan of the onesie twosie monsters you run into the room. I'd rather wait until you reach a room that had a major combat. And one way that you can kind of handle that is maybe just keep track of what creatures you've run into, and then when you finally hit that big room combat, feel free to
throw them in there.
Push them all into that one room, because then, like, it probably makes it harder and more in line with your characters anyway. But then they get to see all those creatures, because sometimes you're like, oh man, this one critter would have been a lot of fun to fight, but fighting it by itself is going to be kind of uninteresting, to do it.
I did kind of hope when you guys had gotten an audience with the Rat Queen, and you had then led the entire scenario's worth of enemies into the room with you, that somebody had done something stupid enough to start a combat in there, because I had built that Goblin Queen. Well, she was a Goblin Queen stat that I took. The Rat Queen. She was intended to be fought by herself, by the whole party. And now you were in there with her and her whole dungeon's worth of people. And I was like, this is going to be the best.
Yeah.
I almost like, if you would have had it be that they were distracted or something, I totally was going to consume or use one of my spell scrolls that had invisibility on it and cast it on Seth to then go run around and start shenaniganizing in the background.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem was there was never an opportunity where, like, because I even asked the question, I was like, are we being watched? Because I know that, if I cast invisibility while they're watching it happen, while they maybe can't see Seth, they know something's up and they're going to, raise the alarm, whatever. So, but I almost did that just for a fun story thing, but then ended up not doing it because I was like, we're being watched. And if I knew if I did that, it would probably just trigger combat, right then and there. So,
Yeah, and I like Janelle makes a good point here. It's about like knowing the system and then like learning it and like then trying to craft that in a way that's fun. We have found that combat after combat after combat for our group in 5e is like, I don't know, it's not that great. The board gamey part of it can be fun sometimes, but we kind of like the role play a little bit more.
yeah,
And
I think
then
generally speaking, our entire group is much more into role play than the combat. I mean, not that we don't want to do combat, but it's not like I think the primary focus for most of our group.
Right, my family's the same way. There's a lot of times we'll play, and I played with my niece and nephew at one point, and at the end, I was like, "What'd you think?" And they were like, "It was fun, but we were fighting a lot." And I kind of like the abilities for us to use our imaginations more, which is the role play. I mean, it seems like that's really why you play RPGs in the first place, is to flex your creative muscle. Certainly, fighting is part of a good adventure. But if all you're doing is fighting, you're not able to really flex that creative muscle like you want.
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
So,
I don't know. Maybe it's just a problem of using the pre-grip modules, but it's just sometimes I think there's just way too much combat for unless you're just really wanting to stretch out your campaign for longer. But I mean, like Ben said, we had the benefit of the pandemic hitting right at the beginning of our Tomb of Annihilation campaign, and we met with everybody pretty much every week for all of 2020. And we when did we finish that? Was it a year and a half? I want to say it was like May of 21 that we finished it.
Tomb of Annihilation?
Yeah.
You're probably right, because then we played Imperial Assault for a little while.
Yeah.
When did
And
then
then
when did
and
you
then we
run
did
those two more dungeons?
the one shot we did like in August of 21, and then right after that we rolled into the three like single dungeon campaigns that I rolled together into, or three single dungeon modules that I rolled into like one campaign. So yeah, it was like almost a year and a half, and I couldn't imagine if we ran every combat, it would have taken the full 3 years before Gage and Evan left that we would have finished Tomb of Annihilation, I think. So I don't know. I mean, at its core, D&D is a combat system. I mean, if you check the rule book, probably what 80% or 75% of the rule book is dedicated to combat or combat adjacent stuff, and the other,
right.
20% is for everything else. So, I mean, I guess that's why there's so much combat out there. But I don't know. I feel like there should be more, which maybe is why, with all this OGL stuff, that they are seeing so many people jumping ship when they're realizing that there's maybe better systems that fit their needs, better.
Sure.
So,
Well, but that's it. That's the main piece of advice you gave, right? For us new GMs, DMs, is swing for the fences. If you think there's too much combat, then change it. If you want to put a cool story thing in, then change it. If you want to have your characters do a side adventure to go look for some crazy magic item that you made up, then just do it.
mm-hmm.
And the worst thing that's going to happen is it's going to be too cool and they're too powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
yeah, and I just remembered. I think you guys already kind of know this, but just remember that you're there to have everyone have a good time. So I guess maybe it takes a little bit of room reading to sense that, but I don't know. I think our group release was pretty easy to tell when people were having fun or not, because heads get buried in phones very quickly when people are losing interest in what you're doing. So it's a pretty easy sign that, okay, I got to do something different, because what we're currently happening right now is not holding the interest of the group right now. So
true.
But
well, I honestly, I could do this all night, and no joke. I mean, well, that's the whole reason why we started this podcast.
Yeah,
like, there is no stopping me doing this. Ryan, I don't know if you had any more questions for Quinn.
No, I think I think that does it for me. Yeah, I
Excellent.
really appreciate you coming on and
Oh yeah,
kind of
anytime.
letting us pick your brain.
Well, this
Because we're
probably
just
won't be
two
the first
noobs who know
time.
nothing.
Yeah.
We know nothing, Lebowski. So yeah,
Maybe you'll
it's
turn
really
into
awesome,
a regular guest, and we'll pull you on again and again. So we just keep picking at your brain.
Hey, no problem. I'm always happy to chat. I mean, how long was that debrief we had? It was like 4 hours, and we just talked like,
Yeah.
all the behind the scenes stuff.
That's
So yeah,
my favorite part of, and maybe this speaks to my ego, but my favorite part of playing with the family is at the end going like, okay, what worked and what didn't work? Let's talk about it. You
Yeah.
know, or, I'll say stuff like, I wrote this and you guys did this and that was crazy, and they're like,
Yeah.
what? And that's my favorate part is the recap.
Yeah, I mean, I basically pulled back the curtain completely after we finished in that session, and I outlaid all the things that I was doing behind the scenes, just because I was like, let's just let it go. Let's tell everybody what I was doing, and 'cause I was kind of using it also as an opportunity for learning for myself to improve, just to see
Right.
what people thought, and so it was good to get that feedback. So I guess that's my last piece I'll give you then. Ask your players for feedback. I mean, especially when you're new, it doesn't hurt to, ask people. I mean, our group is pretty comfortable, I think, with chatting, but if you have a group that isn't comfortable, talking so directly, you can tell them, text me later or whatever.
Yeah, sure. That's okay.
Set up
That's
an
good.
anonymous Dropbox.
Yeah.
Quinn, please give me more feedback.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks again, man. I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, no problem.
Awesome.
Anytime.
Absolutely. Well, this was a great session 0 for our new podcast, session 0. So please actually let us know how we're doing with this podcast. If you want to comment in the comments of the YouTube video, if you watch this on YouTube, or if you want to shoot us a message on Instagram, you can hit Date Night Dice on Instagram, or the Gamecasters if you want to send us some feedback. Otherwise, if you're an audio listener of this, we are going to live stream this show, and we will figure out a schedule. Right now, it's probably going to be the second Wednesday of every month. We'll see how that goes. We're going to have a discussion topic and a special guest. Anything else to add, Ryan?
No, I think that does it. This has been a lot of fun, and I think we'll get more focused as it goes on. We were kind of, just kind of like pouring out brain spewing for the first hour. I think we'll have more, discussion topic to focus us in, and Ben and I are just trying to learn as much as we can, which is what the goal is with the second half of the show with the guest. So the first half, I think, is going to mostly be us choosing a topic that we think is interesting for us as new GMs to talk about and dive into together. And then in the second half, just like learn as much as we can. So I'm really excited for that. It's
going to be me forcing Ryan to workshop an idea with me for an hour. That's what it's going to be.
Hey, that's great. Let's do it, man.
All right. Well, thanks again, Quinn, for joining us. And
no problem,
thanks, everybody, for tuning in live. And we will see you next month. In the meantime, go check out the Gamecasters podcast or the Date Night Thrice podcast or our D-List movie reviews. We'll see you all later.
Have a good night.